Sir, please, hold on. I will do anything to save you.
No one tried to save the billionaire. He was hanging off the bridge, screaming for help, his fingers slipping little by little, while the crowd just stood there watching. Some people shouted, some pulled out their phones, but not one person dared to save him. Then a homeless woman pushed through the crowd. Her clothes were torn, her face was pale. She looked too weak to do anything. But while everyone else froze, she grabbed a broken wooden plank and ran straight to the edge, because in the next few seconds, either the billionaire would fall, or she would risk everything to save him. Adrian Cole was the kind of man people feared before they ever met him. At just 42, he had built one of the most powerful business empires in the city. His name carried weight in boardrooms, on news channels, and across financial markets. To some, he was a genius. To others, he was cold, ruthless, and impossible to challenge. And on that day, someone inside his own company made the mistake of trying. The emergency meeting had started like any other. Expensive suits, forced smiles, fake loyalty. But Adrian had walked into that room already knowing the truth. Millions of dollars had been moved through hidden accounts. Contracts had been manipulated. Someone close to him had been stealing right under his nose. He did not raise his voice at first. He simply laid the evidence on the table. One by one, the faces around him changed. Confidence turned into panic. Eyes started shifting. Nobody wanted to be the first to speak. Then Adrian leaned forward, his voice low and sharp, and said something that froze the room. "I know one of you betrayed me." Silence. The kind of silence that makes every heartbeat sound loud. Minutes later, the meeting exploded into accusations. One executive tried to deny everything. Another blamed accounting. A third walked out. Adrian ended it with one final warning. By morning, he wanted names, proof, and full confessions. Anyone involved would be destroyed. He left the building furious. Outside, the sky was grey, the wind was hard, and the city felt colder than usual. Adrian barely noticed. He got into his car, loosened his tie, and stared out the window as his phone rang again. It was one of his senior executives. Adrian answered immediately. The voice on the other end was nervous, defensive, and talking too fast. Excuses, delays, claims of innocence. Adrian's jaw tightened with every second. Before long, he told the driver to stop the car. He needed air, or maybe he needed space before his anger became something worse. He stepped out near the bridge, still on the call, and walked toward the railing as traffic rushed past behind him. The executive kept talking, but Adrian was no longer listening. His mind was racing. The betrayal, the lies, the feeling that someone he trusted had been laughing behind his back for months. Then everything changed in 1 second. A cyclist speeding past swerved too close. Adrian turned sharply. His shoe slipped against the damp concrete. His phone flew from his hand, and before he could catch himself, his body slammed against the railing and tipped over the edge. For one horrifying moment, the world disappeared beneath him. Then his hands locked around the cold metal barrier. He was hanging above the river. The water churned below. His polished shoes kicked wildly against the air. His arms burned instantly. Panic rushed through his chest so hard he could barely breathe. "Help!" he shouted. "Help me!" Cars slowed. People stopped. Faces turned. Within seconds, a crowd began to gather. But no one moved. Some gasped. Some stared. Some lifted their phones and started recording. A billionaire was dangling over the river, begging for his life, and the city watched like it was entertainment. Adrian's fingers began to slip. His strength was fading. And across the bridge, through the growing crowd of frozen strangers, one woman saw what everyone else refused to do. Her clothes were torn. Her face was tired. One hand instinctively rested on the swell of her pregnant belly. Her name was Mara, and the moment she saw the man hanging over the water, she started running. Mara had learned a long time ago that the city could look straight at your suffering and keep walking. By the time the sun rose each morning, she was already awake, not because she had rested, but because cold concrete never let anyone truly sleep. For the past 4 months, she had been living between abandoned storefronts, bus shelters, and the back corner of a crumbling building no one cared enough to lock. Every night she curled herself around her swollen belly, using her thin arms as if they could somehow shield the child inside her from hunger, from rain, from the cruel world waiting outside. That morning had been no different. She had stood near a food stall, not begging, just hoping. The smell of bread and hot tea drifted into the street, and for a moment her empty stomach hurt so badly she thought she might faint. She had asked the vendor if there was anything left over, even scraps, even something that would have been thrown away. The answer came with a hard stare. "Move away from here," the man snapped. "You're scaring customers." A few people turned to look at her. One woman covered her child's eyes, as if Mara herself were something dirty. Another man laughed under his breath. Mara lowered her head and stepped back, one hand on her belly, the other pressed against the wall to steady herself. She said nothing. What was the point? By noon, the pain in her lower back had worsened. Every step felt heavier. The baby had been restless all day, and though the movement should have comforted her, it only reminded her of how little she had to offer. No home, no bed, no doctor, no safe place to bring a child into the world. And yet she kept walking, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering how she had ended up here. So when she reached the bridge and heard the shouting, her first instinct was not curiosity. It was survival. Crowds usually meant trouble. Trouble usually meant police, chaos, or people blaming someone like her for something she did not do. But then she saw him, a man in an expensive suit hanging over the edge, his face twisted with pure terror. And around him stood dozens of people doing absolutely nothing. Some were screaming, some were whispering, some were recording with their phones held high, trying to get the perfect angle of another human being moments away from death. Mara's eyes widened. "Why are you just standing there?" she cried, pushing forward. "Help him!" Nobody listened. A tall man near the front glanced at her torn clothes and scoffed. "Stay back," he said. "You'll make it worse." Another woman wrinkled her nose. Someone already called emergency services. Mara looked over the railing. The man's arms were shaking violently now. His fingers were sliding inch by inch along the metal. He did not have time to wait for sirens. "He's falling!" Mara shouted. "Somebody grab him!" Still, no one moved. In that moment, something inside her hardened. She had been ignored, mocked, pushed aside, treated like she did not matter. But she could not stand there and watch a life disappear, while everyone else protected their clothes, their comfort, their fear. Her breathing quickened as she scanned the ground. Then she saw it, a broken wooden plank lying near the side of the bridge, likely left behind from some roadside repair. Without thinking twice, Mara rushed toward it and lifted it with trembling hands. It was heavy, her body ached, her legs felt unsteady, but she dragged it toward the railing anyway. The crowd stared at her now, some in disbelief, some in shock. One man muttered, "She's pregnant." Another whispered, "She's going to get herself killed." Mara ignored them all. With both hands gripping the rough wood, she stepped toward the edge, looked down at the drowning billionaire below, and made a choice no one else had been brave enough to make. She climbed onto the railing. For a moment, the entire bridge went silent. It was as if the city itself had stopped breathing. A homeless pregnant woman was now standing on the railing, balancing her weak body above the river, while the billionaire below fought to keep his grip on the cold metal bar. The same people who had refused to help suddenly looked terrified, but even now, most of them still did not move. Mara's hands tightened around the wooden plank. Adrian gathered what little strength he had left and lunged upward again. This time, his hand caught the plank. The bridge exploded with noise. "He's got it! Hold him! Don't let go!" Adrian clung to the wood, but his hand was wet and weak. The plank jerked violently, nearly pulling Mara forward. Her body pitched over the rail, and for one terrible second, it looked like both of them were going into the river. A cry escaped the crowd. Mara's knees buckled, but she held on. Pain tore through her arms. Her breath caught in her throat. Tears sprang to her eyes, not from fear, but from the unbearable strain of trying to hold the weight of a desperate man while protecting the life inside her. And then, finally, the shame of the moment reached the crowd. Two men rushed forward first, then another, then another. Hands grabbed the back of Mara's coat. Others seized the plank. A pair of strong arms caught Adrian by the wrist as he dangled helplessly below. The struggle became wild, messy, desperate. Shoes scraped across concrete. People shouted over one another. The plank bent with the pressure. "Pull! Now! Again!" With one final heave, Adrian was dragged over the railing and slammed onto the bridge. He landed hard on his back, coughing, shaking, and staring at the grey sky, as if he could not believe he was still alive. All around him, people stepped back in stunned silence, but only for a second, because just a few feet away, Mara suddenly dropped to her knees. One hand flew to her stomach, the other braced against the pavement, her face twisted with pain. A few bystanders looked toward her, startled, as if they had only just remembered she existed. Adrian turned his head weakly in her direction, still gasping for air, his eyes struggling to focus on the woman who had saved him. But before anyone could speak to her, before anyone could thank her, before anyone could even understand what she had just done, Mara pushed herself up and disappeared into the crowd. By the time the ambulance doors slammed shut, Adrian Cole still could not stop shaking. His hands were scraped raw. His suit was soaked. His chest rose and fell in short, uneven breaths as the paramedics checked his pulse, wrapped a blanket around his shoulders, and asked him the same questions again and again. "Can you hear me, sir? Did you hit your head? Do you know your name?" Of course he knew his name. The whole city knew his name. But in that moment, lying inside the back of an ambulance with river water dripping from his sleeves, Adrian did not feel like the untouchable billionaire people feared in boardrooms. He felt like a man who had looked death in the face and realized that money, power, and influence meant nothing when your fingers were slipping off cold metal. He turned his head toward the open doors. The bridge was still crowded. Police officers were pushing people back. Flashing lights reflected against car windows. Reporters had already begun to gather, sensing a story. Phones were still raised. Some people were talking fast, excitedly, retelling the moment as if they had been heroes in it. Adrian's jaw tightened. "Where is she?" he asked suddenly. The paramedic blinked. "Sir?" "The woman," Adrian said, voice rough. "The one who saved me. Where is she?" The paramedic glanced outside, then back at him. "We're not sure." Adrian pushed himself up too quickly, ignoring the sting in his arms. "Find her." "Sir, you need to stay seated." "Find her," he repeated, sharper this time. But nobody had an answer. At the hospital, the chaos only grew. Doctors checked him for fractures, internal injuries, shock and exhaustion. Assistants from his company arrived in a panic. Lawyers called. His phone, now replaced, would not stop vibrating. News alerts spread across every screen in the room. Billionaire Adrian Cole nearly dies in bridge accident. Shocking video captures dramatic rescue in broad daylight. Witnesses describe moment business. Tycoon slipped over edge. Adrian stared at the headlines with cold disbelief. Accident. Witnesses. Tycoon. Not one of them seemed to understand what he could not stop seeing. A crowd had watched him beg for help, and only one person had moved. "Play the video again," he told his assistant. The woman hesitated, then handed him a tablet. Someone in the crowd had uploaded footage. It was shaky, loud, and filled with the useless panic of people who had chosen recording over action. Adrian watched himself hanging over the river. He watched the faces leaning over the railing. He watched his own body slipping lower. Then he saw her. She appeared in the frame like she had come from nowhere. Thin, worn out, unsteady. One hand on the curve of her pregnant belly, the other dragging a piece of broken wood toward the railing while everyone around her stared. Adrian's expression changed. "Pause it!" The image froze on her face. Even blurred by distance, there was something unforgettable about her. Not beauty in the polished way magazines praised, something stronger. A look of pain, determination, and absolute refusal to stand by while another human being died. "Who is she?" Adrian asked quietly. No one in the room answered. His assistant swallowed. "We're trying to identify her, sir." "Trying?" "She left before police got her statement." Adrian looked back at the frozen image. She had risked 2 lives. And then she had vanished before anyone could even say thank you. By evening, the story had spread across the city. Television anchors talked about Adrian's survival. Social media argued over whether the crowd should be ashamed. Business rivals pretended concern. Comment sections exploded with opinions, outrage, and gossip. But Adrian noticed something disturbing. The focus was still on him. His name, his wealth, his near death. The woman who had actually saved him was becoming a footnote. That was when Adrian made up his mind. He lowered the tablet, looked at the head of his security team, and spoke with the same force that had once terrified boardrooms. "I want every camera angle from that bridge. Traffic footage, street footage, witness statements, online videos, everything." The room went still. Then Adrian added, his voice colder now, "Find the woman who saved my life." And somewhere in the city, under a darkening sky, the woman no one had noticed was already disappearing back into the shadows. While the city argued over videos and headlines, Mara was walking back into the dark like nothing had happened. No cameras followed her there. No reporters cared where she slept. No one from the crowd that had watched her risk her life asked if she was hurt, hungry, or even alive. By the time night settled over the streets, the woman who had saved one of the richest men in the city had returned to the same broken corner of the world she had left that morning. Her shelter was an abandoned storage building behind a row of shuttered shops. Half the roof leaked when it rained. The floor was cracked concrete. A torn blanket lay folded in one corner beside a small bag that held everything she owned. 2 baby shirts, a bottle of water, a worn photograph, and one envelope she protected more carefully than anything else. Mara lowered herself onto the blanket with a sharp breath. The pain in her body had gotten worse. Her arms still trembled from holding the plank. Her back burned, and every few minutes a tight ache twisted low across her stomach, forcing her to close her eyes and wait for it to pass. She placed both hands over her belly. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm here." The baby shifted beneath her palms. Usually that movement gave her comfort. Tonight it gave her fear. What if climbing that railing had done something terrible? What if the strain, the panic, the weight of that moment? Mara bit her lip and leaned forward, fighting the rising pressure in her chest. She had told herself all day not to think about it. But now she was alone. And alone, the truth always came back. Mara had not always lived like this. There was a time when she still believed promises, a time when she trusted words spoken with a soft voice and kind eyes. The father of her child had once told her he would protect her, that they would build a life together, that she would never face the world alone. But the moment he learned the truth of her pregnancy and the trouble surrounding her past, he disappeared. Just like that. No goodbye worth remembering, no hand to hold, no place to stay, only silence. And after that silence came everything else. Lost work, closed doors, people who judged first and listened never. The little safety she had left was stripped away one piece at a time until the streets became the only place that would still take her. A sudden cramp cut through her thoughts. Mara doubled over, one hand gripping the blanket beneath her. She breathed slowly until it eased, but when she sat back up, tears were already in her eyes. From the doorway came a soft voice. "You're worse tonight." Mara looked up to see old Nessa, the elderly woman who slept 2 buildings away, stepping carefully inside. Nessa had the sharp eyes of someone who had survived too much, and the gentle hands of someone who still cared anyway. In one hand, she held half a loaf of bread wrapped in newspaper. "I brought this," Nessa said. "Eat." Mara shook her head. "You keep it." Nessa clicked her tongue and placed it in her lap. "Don't be proud when pride can't feed a child." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Nessa's eyes dropped to Mara's stomach. "You need a doctor." Mara let out a weak laugh with no joy in it. "With what money?" "With whatever mercy is left in this world." Mara looked away. Mercy had not done much for her lately. Her gaze drifted to the small bag in the corner, to the worn envelope inside it, the last piece of proof that her life had once meant something, and that what happened to her had not been an accident. She had carried that document through rain, hunger, and humiliation, because some part of her still believed the truth inside it mattered. Nessa followed her eyes, but said nothing. Outside, distant sirens passed through the night. Inside, Mara pressed one hand to her belly and bowed her head. For the first time since the bridge, she let herself admit what terrified her most. Saving Adrian Cole might have been the bravest thing she had ever done, but it might also have cost her more than she could bear. By sunrise the next morning, Adrian Cole had already turned his hospital room into a war room. The same man who usually woke to stock reports and acquisition updates was now staring at grainy screenshots, traffic camera stills, and shaky social media clips from the bridge. His bruised hands rested on the blanket over his lap, but his eyes never left the screen. "Again," he said. His head of security replayed the footage. There she was, a blur at first, then clearer in the next angle. Torn coat, loose hair, thin frame, one hand dragging the wooden plank, the other bracing herself against the railing as the crowd watched in frozen fear. Adrian leaned forward. "Pause." The image froze. Even through the poor quality, he could see how exhausted she looked. Not dramatic, not polished, not like someone trying to be seen. She looked like a woman who had already been carrying too much long before she reached that bridge. "She was pregnant," Adrian said quietly. No one answered. His assistant shifted uneasily. "Yes, sir." Adrian's jaw tightened. And she still climbed over that railing, while everyone else stood there and filmed. The room went silent. He had spent years commanding loyalty, buying expertise, and solving problems with speed and force. But this felt different. This was not a deal to be closed, or a rival to be crushed, and that thought would not leave him. "What do we have?" he asked. His security chief cleared his throat. "We've collected 6 public videos, 2 traffic angles, and statements from several witnesses. No confirmed identity yet. She appears to have left on foot heading east from the bridge. Then expand the search east. We already have teams." "Expand it," Adrian repeated. "Shelters, clinics, soup kitchens, street vendors, every place someone like her might go." His assistant hesitated. "Sir, there's another issue." Adrian looked up. "What issue?" "People online found out you're trying to locate her." She swallowed. "Some are already pretending to be connected to the rescue. A few are claiming they know her. One man even tried to collect reward money that hasn't been offered." Adrian's expression darkened. "Then offer none." By noon, he had checked himself out against medical advice. The doctors protested, his legal team objected, his board called twice. Adrian ignored all of them. A black car dropped him near the bridge just after 1 o'clock. The wind was colder than the day before, and the sight of the railing sent a sharp memory through his body. For one brief second, he felt again the terror of slipping fingers and empty air beneath him, but he forced himself forward. He walked past the exact place where he had fallen, and stopped near a fruit stand on the corner. An older man stood behind it, arranging oranges with slow, careful hands. Adrian approached him directly. "Did you see what happened here yesterday?" The man looked up, recognized him instantly, and straightened. "Everyone saw it." "I'm not asking about me," Adrian said. "I'm asking about the woman." The fruit seller studied him for a moment, as if measuring whether this question was real. Then he nodded slowly. "I saw her before the crowd noticed her," he said. "She passed here often. Quiet girl, kept her head down, always looked tired." Adrian felt something sharpen inside him. "You know her?" "Not well, but I've seen her." The man pointed down the road. "Sometimes near the old factory blocks, sometimes by the church kitchen when they have food." Adrian followed the direction of his hand. It was not much, but it was the first real lead. He reached into his coat, pulled out cash, and placed it on the stand. The old man shook his head at first, but Adrian left it there anyway. "Thank you," he said. Then he turned toward the street, the cold air cutting across his face. Behind him, his security team started moving. Ahead of him stretched a part of the city Adrian Cole had spent most of his life avoiding, and somewhere inside, it was the woman who had disappeared before the world could even learn her name. By late afternoon, the city had changed its face. The polished towers and crowded business streets were gone now, replaced by rusted fences, broken sidewalks, and old buildings that looked as though they had been forgotten one brick at a time. Rain had begun to fall in a thin, steady curtain, turning the roads dark and making the air smell of metal and wet dust. Adrian Cole stood beside his car and looked down the narrow street ahead. "This is where she was last seen," his security chief said. Adrian barely nodded. He had come too far to turn back now. Ignoring the umbrella one of his men tried to hand him, he walked forward into the rain. Water soaked his hair and slid down the collar of his coat, but he kept going, passing shuttered shops, crumbling walls, and doorways where tired faces quickly looked away. Every few steps, he scanned the street, searching for the woman from the bridge, the woman who had appeared out of nowhere, the woman who had vanished just as fast. Then, near the side of an abandoned building, he saw her. She was standing beneath a broken awning that offered almost no protection from the rain. Her clothes were damp, her shoulders slightly bent, one hand pressed low against her stomach as if trying to hold herself together through sheer will. She looked even thinner than she had in the videos. For a moment, Adrian stopped walking. Not because he was unsure, because the sight of her hit harder than he expected. This was the woman who had saved his life. And this was how she was living. "Mara," he said carefully. She turned at the sound of a stranger speaking her name. Her eyes met his, tired and guarded. For a second, she looked confused, as if she were trying to place a face she had never really seen clearly before. On the bridge, he had been hanging over death. Here, standing in front of her, he was just a man in an expensive coat with rain on his face. Then recognition flickered. Her brows drew together. "You," she said softly. Adrian stepped closer, but slowly so he would not frighten her. "Yes." For a few seconds, the rain filled the silence between them. "I've been looking for you," he said. Mara gave a weak, almost bitter laugh. "Why?" The word caught him off guard. "Why?" Adrian repeated. "You're alive," she said. "That's enough, isn't it?" Her voice was not rude, it was worse, it was tired. Adrian looked at her carefully. "You saved my life." Mara held his gaze, but there was no softness in her expression. "And now what? You came to say thank you so you can feel better?" The words landed harder than any accusation from a boardroom ever had. Adrian opened his mouth, then closed it again, because the truth was, part of him had come for gratitude, for answers, for closure. But standing here, seeing the hollow exhaustion in her face, he understood that none of that mattered first. "You shouldn't be out here like this," he said quietly. Mara's eyes flashed. "And where exactly should I be?" Before Adrian could answer, Mara swayed. It happened so suddenly that for 1 second he thought she had only shifted her weight. But then her face lost color. Her hand tightened against her stomach. Her knees buckled. Adrian lunged forward just in time to catch her before she hit the ground. "Mara!" She gasped in pain, her body trembling in his arms. Up close, he could feel how light she was, how badly she was shivering, how much effort it seemed to take her just to breathe. "Call the car!" Adrian shouted. His security team rushed forward, but Adrian was already lifting her himself. "No hospital," Mara whispered, barely audible over the rain. Adrian looked down at her. "You need help." "No." Her fingers weakly caught his sleeve. "I can't pay." Something in Adrian's face changed. For perhaps the first time in years, money felt less like power and more like an insult to the reality in front of him. "You don't have to pay," he said, his voice firm. "Not for this." Her eyes fluttered, still filled with suspicion even through the pain, as if kindness itself had become something too dangerous to trust. Then another wave of pain hit her, and she cried out. That was enough. Adrian carried her through the rain toward the waiting car, one arm supporting her shoulders, the other shielding her as much as he could. His coat was soaked through. His polished shoes splashed through dirty water. None of it mattered. As the car door opened, Mara's head fell weakly against him, and for the first time since the bridge, Adrian felt a different kind of fear. Not the fear of falling, the fear of being too late. The hospital lights were too bright. Everything about the place felt too clean, too sharp, too controlled for the chaos Adrian felt inside. Nurses moved quickly through the corridors. Doctors spoke in clipped, urgent tones. Machines beeped behind closed doors. And somewhere beyond those doors, the woman who had saved his life was being examined while carrying a child she could barely protect on her own. Adrian stood just outside the treatment room, his wet coat draped over a chair, his hands still cold from the rain. A doctor stepped out at last, pulling off her gloves. "How is she?" Adrian asked immediately. The doctor looked at him with the calm expression of someone used to panic. "She's severely exhausted, malnourished, dehydrated. Her blood pressure is unstable, and the pregnancy is under stress." Adrian's face hardened. "Is the baby alive?" "Yes," the doctor said. "For now. But both mother and child are at risk if she doesn't get proper care. For now." Those two words sank into him like a blade. "What does she need?" he asked. The doctor didn't hesitate. "Rest, nutrition, monitoring, safety, and no more trauma." Adrian let out a slow breath, but there was no relief in it. Mara had already been living inside trauma. The bridge had only added another wound to a body and soul that were already carrying too many. "I'll cover everything," he said. The doctor gave a small nod. "That's good." Because she has nothing on file. No insurance, no stable address, no emergency contact. No emergency contact. Adrian looked away for a second. A woman brave enough to risk her life for a stranger had no one in the world listed to stand beside her. A nurse approached from the admissions desk carrying a small plastic bag. "These were her belongings," she said. "We'll log them unless someone needs to review them for identification." Adrian glanced toward the bag. Inside were a few items so worn and small they barely seemed like a life at all. A folded baby shirt, a bottle cap, a cheap comb with broken teeth, and an old envelope, yellowed at the edges, bent from being opened and closed too many times. The nurse set the bag down on the counter. Adrian's eyes caught on the envelope first. A name was written across the front in faded ink. Eleanor Vale. Something about it struck him instantly, not because he knew the woman, but because he knew that name. Or rather, he knew where he had heard it. He reached for the envelope slowly, his heartbeat beginning to change. "Sir?" the nurse asked. "I just need to confirm her identity," Adrian said. He opened it carefully. Inside was an old employment document, a formal letter. The paper was fragile, stained by time, but the logo at the top was unmistakable. Cole Holdings. Adrian's fingers froze. He read the name again. Elena Vale, then the date, then the signature at the bottom. It was not his, it was his father's. For a second, the hallway around him seemed to go quiet. Not silent, but distant, as though the whole world had taken one step back, while something colder moved into place. He scanned the page. Eleanor Vale had once been employed as a domestic assistant in one of the private Cole family residences. The letter referenced discretion, private family matters, and a termination under circumstances that did not feel ordinary. Another paper behind it appeared to be a complaint draft, unfinished and never filed. Several lines were smeared, but one phrase remained clear enough to read. She was blamed to protect someone powerful. Adrian felt his jaw tighten. Another voice spoke behind him. "You shouldn't touch that." He turned. Mara was standing in the doorway of her room. She looked weak, one hand resting against the frame for support, but her eyes were fully awake now, and in those eyes was something far sharper than pain. Recognition, not of him, of the papers in his hand. Adrian lowered them slightly. "Mara." "That was my mother," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the corridor. Adrian stared at her. Mara took a slow step forward, though her body still looked unsteady. "She worked for your family," she said, "and when something happened in that house, they made sure she carried the blame." The words settled heavily between them. Adrian looked back down at the letter, then up at Mara again, as the first terrible shape of the truth began to form. This was not random. This was not just a rescue. The woman who had saved him from the bridge had been tied to his family long before either of them knew it, and judging by the pain in Mara's eyes, whatever the Cole name had done to hers had never stopped haunting her. Adrian did not sleep that night. Long after the hospital corridors had gone quiet, long after the nurses dimmed the lights and the city outside sank into darkness, he remained seated alone in a private waiting room with Eleanor Vale's papers spread out before him. The more he read, the colder he became. The official language was polished, careful, and designed to hide the truth. Terms like internal matter, breach of trust, and necessary dismissal were printed neatly across the page. But Adrian had spent his whole life around powerful people. He knew what buried guilt looked like when it wore expensive words. And this was guilt. His father had not simply fired Mara's mother, he had buried her. There were references to a private incident at one of the family residences, missing records, a payment authorized without formal explanation, a handwritten note from an old legal advisor warning that if Eleanor spoke publicly, reputational consequences could follow. Reputational consequences. Adrian's mouth tightened. That was the language of people who believed their name mattered more than another person's life. By dawn, he had already called in his legal archives team. By morning, he had demanded access to sealed company files dating back more than 20 years. By noon, he was no longer asking questions. He was hunting. In the top-floor conference room of Cole Holdings, the mood turned poisonous the moment Adrian walked in. The executives seated around the polished table could tell from his expression that this was no ordinary meeting. His bruises had faded only slightly. The scrape marks on his hands were still visible, but there was something harder now in his eyes. He placed a thin folder on the table. "Someone is going to explain," he said, "why records tied to my father's private residences were altered, removed, and hidden under company legal protection." Silence. The board members looked at one another but said nothing. Then Gregory Shaw, the same senior executive who had argued with Adrian before the bridge incident, leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "With respect," Gregory said, "digging into old family matters is reckless, especially now." Adrian stared at him. "Especially now." Gregory's expression stayed smooth. "You nearly died yesterday. The company is unstable. Investors are nervous. This is the wrong moment to create scandal from the past." The room stayed still. Then Adrian gave a small, humorless laugh. "Scandal?" he said. "Interesting word." Gregory did not answer. Adrian opened the folder and slid several copied documents across the table. A woman named Elena Vale was destroyed to protect someone in this company's orbit. Her daughter is now homeless, pregnant, and nearly died after saving my life, while the rest of the city stood and watched. A few faces visibly changed, but Gregory only looked annoyed. "We don't even know the full story," he said, "and even if there were mistakes made back then, dragging them into the public eye could collapse everything your father built." That was the moment Adrian understood. Gregory was not afraid of the truth. He was afraid of exposure. Adrian took one step closer to the table. "How much do you know?" Gregory's silence answered first. Then his jaw shifted. "Enough." Before Adrian could push further, his phone began vibrating in his pocket. He ignored it. It rang again, and again. Irritation flashed across his face as he pulled it out, ready to silence it, until he saw the hospital number. He answered immediately. "What is it?" The nurse on the other end sounded breathless. "Mr. Cole, it's Mara. She's having severe pain and early contractions. The doctors need to move quickly." For 1 second, the boardroom vanished. All Adrian saw was Mara in that rain-soaked alley, collapsing because the world had already taken too much from her. "I'm on my way," he said. He ended the call and looked up. Gregory started to speak. "Adrian, this meeting isn't finished." "It is for you," Adrian said coldly. Then, in front of the entire board, he picked up the folder and added, "Lock every archive room, freeze Gregory Shaw's access, and if one file disappears before I return, I'll make sure the police are the next people asking questions." No one moved, no one argued. Adrian turned and walked out. By the time he reached the hospital, the storm inside him had become something else entirely. Not rage, resolve, because while Mara fought to keep her child alive, the truth was finally forcing its way into the light. And this time, Adrian was no longer deciding whether to protect the family name. He was deciding how much of it deserved to survive. By the time Adrian reached the maternity floor, the hospital hallway was already thick with tension. Nurses moved quickly past him. A doctor was speaking urgently to someone near the nurses' station. Somewhere behind the closed doors ahead, Mara was crying out in pain, and each sound hit Adrian harder than he expected. He stopped outside the delivery room, his chest tight. For a man who had spent years controlling outcomes, solving crises, and commanding entire rooms with a single sentence, this moment was unbearable. There was nothing to negotiate, nothing to threaten, nothing to buy that could guarantee the life of the woman inside, or the child she had fought so hard to protect. A doctor approached him with a grave expression. "She went into labor too early," she said. "Her body is exhausted, and the stress has made things worse. We're doing everything we can." Adrian looked toward the door. "Will they survive?" The doctor hesitated, and that hesitation said more than words. "We're trying," she said. Trying. That word again. Adrian ran a hand over his face and stepped back against the wall. For the first time in years, he bowed his head and said nothing. The hospital around him buzzed with movement, but inside him there was only one thought repeating again and again. Not her. She had already suffered enough. Minutes stretched into an hour, then another. At one point, old Nessa arrived, escorted by one of Adrian's men after security had nearly turned her away. She looked out of place in the bright hospital corridor, her coat old and worn, but her eyes were sharp as ever. "You found her," Nessa said quietly. Adrian gave a small nod. Nessa looked at him for a long moment. "Then don't fail her now." Before Adrian could respond, the delivery room door opened again. A nurse stepped out, breathless but smiling. "The baby is here," she said. Adrian froze. "And the mother?" he asked instantly. The nurse's smile widened. "Both alive." For one brief second, Adrian closed his eyes. The relief hit him so hard it almost felt like weakness. A little while later, they let him in. Mara lay pale and exhausted against the pillows, her hair damp against her forehead, her body drained by pain and struggle. But in her arms was a tiny wrapped child, fragile and impossibly small, breathing softly against her chest. For a moment, Adrian could only stand there. The same woman who had once climbed onto a bridge railing with nothing but courage and desperation now held a life she had nearly lost, trying to protect. Mara looked up at him, her expression still tired, still cautious, but softer than before. "They said the baby is strong," she whispered. Adrian stepped closer, his voice low. "Just like the mother." Something flickered in her eyes then. Not trust fully, not yet, but something gentler than suspicion. In the days that followed, the city learned the truth. The homeless pregnant woman who had saved billionaire Adrian Cole was no longer a faceless clip in a viral video. Her name was spoken everywhere now. Mara Vale, the woman the city had ignored, the woman who had shamed a crowd with her courage, the woman whose mother had been buried under the weight of a powerful family's secrets. Adrian did not hide from any of it. He released the records. He exposed Gregory Shaw and every document tied to the cover-up. He publicly acknowledged what had been done to Elena Vale and what that silence had cost her daughter. And when reporters expected him to offer charity, he gave something else. At a press conference days later, Adrian stood before the cameras and said, "Mara Vale does not need pity. She deserves justice, dignity, and the future that was stolen from her family." He arranged a private home for her recovery, full medical care, legal restoration of her mother's name, a trust for the baby, and when he offered it, he did not frame it as generosity. He framed it as what it was, a debt. But the greatest surprise came from Mara herself. When the cameras were gone and the noise had faded, she looked out the hospital window with her baby in her arms and said quietly, "I didn't save you because you were rich." Adrian stood beside her. "I know." She looked down at her child. "I saved you because no one should be left to fall while people watch." Adrian said nothing for a moment. Then he answered, "And that's why you were the only one worth calling brave." Outside, the city kept moving as it always had. But inside that quiet hospital room, something had changed forever. Because the woman the world had called worthless had done more than save a billionaire on a bridge. She had forced an entire city to look at itself. And in the end, the greatest reward was not the money, the headlines, or the public praise. It was this: Mara and her child had survived, and this time they would not be forgotten. Before we end, this story leaves us with a simple but powerful lesson. The value of a person is not in their money, their clothes, or the way the world sees them. Real character is revealed in moments of pressure. When everyone else stood back and chose safety, one ignored woman chose courage. Sometimes the people society overlooks are the very ones with the biggest hearts. For me, that is what makes this story unforgettable. It is not really about a billionaire being saved on a bridge. It is about humanity. It is about the shame of standing by while someone suffers, and the quiet greatness of the one person who refuses to look away. In my opinion, Mara was the true hero of this story. She had every reason to keep walking, every reason to think only about her own pain, yet she still chose compassion. That kind of courage cannot be bought, and it cannot be faked. Now I want to hear from you. Who was your favorite character in this story, and why? Was it Mara for her bravery, Adrian for choosing to make things right, or someone else who stood out to you? Tell me in the comments, because I always enjoy hearing how these stories speak to different people in different ways. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps this channel keep bringing you powerful stories that remind us what kindness, courage, and truth really look like in the real world. This is Mr. Hope, and I will see you in the next story.